Hello, everyone. So, today we will deal with a question which relates to the networking capacities of Node.js. The question is generically set up a server to provide a minimalistic example of a network Node.js application. So, you might very well imagine the interview asking you this question in some form or another, like, please just give me an example of how you would set up a server client in Node.js. You might go about this, by the way, via the more HTTP understanding, which could be all right, I guess, but the interview would probably redirect you to a more fundamental library on Node.js. And to be absolutely clear, we're here speaking of net, the net and serve Roger Federer. No, well, so yeah, it's about the net library in Node.js. The question is intentionally vague, and what you obviously have to have is, let's say, two files. You can do without or with more, but this shows that you have a concept that you can throw in something uh, to execute a script to execute as a server and a script to execute as a client. And at the end of the day, we want something to appear like this, which shows that we had established a communication between a client and a server. All right, so let's go about it. And before doing that, I'll cut. Oulele! I burned all the bridges here. Just quickly erase all of this stuff and go about our development now. So, the first step to respect, and I like before developing to establish a comment on what are the steps I'm trying to implement. The first step should and would be find or make the requirement dependency. Let's see, did I write it well? I did. Look at me being brilliant here. To the net library. So let's go ahead and do that. But maybe we want to establish the other steps first. Let's patience. So the second step should be something uh, that really is about creating um, the server. Let's say the networking server. All right. And just to be a little bit more comprehensive, there you go. Third, I would want to put the server in listening mode. Why? Because upon creating some server, it doesn't just happen to step into the listening mode naturally. And you might very well imagine that the difference between the first and the second steps is the first is actually buying a server, so to speak, a physical server, and the third is really connecting it. Something of that analogy. Actually, programmatically, it's far easier, but just to make stuff clear and understandable. The fourth step should be something about mm, well, it should be something about actually making the server um, receptive to data events. And this is where it shows that I've read some documentation before and that I know what I'm doing. But the data events, so your server is actually on listening mode, isn't enough for it to deal with some particular events. You still have to manage some events on your own. And the fourth step is one that will allow us to see that. And a fifth step, and it should be the final step. Well, I don't think it's even necessary here. So let's go with these babies here. The first one is just the casual, usual. That's something that you have to be very much at ease with the require net. You don't have to npm it because you have it on your Node.js naturally. And the second step should be about creating the server via the requirement and the server create method. Now, that method takes two things. It does take a callback function, and we will not look into it just as yet. We will go ahead and do the second or the third step, which is server on listening mode. So there is a method which calls the listen mode, and it does require a port. It's optional, but obviously, if you want stuff to work, you have to provide at least something, which in this case is the port. Now, there are two ways you can put in the ports. I'm going to choose the least barbaric one, which is to define a constant. And by the way, this constant in an industrial mode should not even belong to this file, the server.js file. It should be somewhere in a more specific file, but we will go with this. It should be enough for today, and we will provide the port. Obviously, you could have just put in the 777 port inside of the lesson method without passing by a variable, but we are not barbarics here. The second method is a callback function, and the callback function will really just serve us about displaying the some logs here. You can add it as a step somewhere if you want in here. Why not? It's not necessary, but it's sort of good practice. And let's call it 3.1. Log something to announce your server is launched. Okay, cool. So let's do the login now, and something wise here, launched server. But I'm not in a very creative mood today. So there we are. All right. Well, isn't this all fancy? Let's go ahead and give it a first shot. Ooh la la, it works. Launch server. Great. Now, I forgot a step there. It was the fourth one, which is make the server receptive to the data event. I'm going to continue forgetting it for a while, and for a very simple reason, which I'm going to tell you soon enough. Let's now jump to the client file and let's do some stuff there. Okay. My famous list. So the requirement. I want to create a client, which more technically is a connection, really. And I would like to third, well, send some data. Yeah, just be blunt about this. Write something. The keyword is write. Write something to the server. Okay, that's too much. So again, they require babe here. Let me require you. And let's call this client. Now feel free to call it a connection. It would be more precise. I just like to call it client because because it signifies really the antagonism between client server, but you can call it connection too. You do that with create connection. So this is a method here which, as it says, creates the connection to the server. Clearly, here, somehow you must be thinking, well, what about the port? Indeed, the port of the server is well defined, so we need to tap into that port from the side of the client to make sure stuff works. Now, going back to the definition of the method, I quite couldn't see where we have the port in here. When this happens, and if you don't know very much about the functions as they are defined in Node.js, you can ask Google, but a good reflex is to just go ahead and take a look at the definitions of the methods. And I do that usually on VS Code by calling by clicking Control and click, and it drives me to the definition file of the server, found the server, the methods, and one of those is actually endowed with a port in the signature of the function. This is what you might call an overloading of the same method. So you have a method with one name, but different signatures, different arguments and returns eventually, and some of which you can use differently. We actually are more interested with this definition here. And to simplify, it does require ports, it's not optional, a host which is optional, and some form of callback function. Okay, so we are going to use this one, and the way to do that is to guess what? Call in a port. Now, the port here again. Well, I got. Well, nope, not enough. So there it is, port, and then the callback. Now, what do we do in this callback thing here? Well, we said that in the third step we want to write something to the server. Knowledge is weapon. The way you write something is actually calling the reference of the client onto itself, and there is a specific method to do so. There are actually multiple ones, but let's go with this one, which takes a buffer, some kind of a buffer string. And so in it, we will put in some message. Let it be, for example, hello, I am a client. And there we are. All right. So, revising our steps, we should be practically fine, except obviously that you are maybe remembering that I left this one intentionally here. And this is why I left it. It's because I'm going to settle in on my terminal and I'm going to call the client and I'm going to see that nothing happens. But why? Well, because again, I intentionally forgot to make the server receptive to the data events. And this is just a distorted way, by the way, of telling you, yo, next time you don't see stuff, you might want to think about if you connected everything and if you put the required listeners for you to make the communication between the server and the client. At which rate, I should go ahead and add the management of that event, the handling of that event. Well, the way to do it is you might think, well, okay, you can probably find something in here. You should try it at least. But I don't see any data event in here. The trick is to take note that while creating a server, you can endow it with a callback method which takes a socket. Socket, like the boss of Michael Scott on that famous show, The Office. And you can make the socket here on the data events. Ooh la la! This is all very nice. Isn't this the nicest? I'm just doing some linting here because I enjoy that stuff. And it needs a callback method with the data buffer. And once you have that, you almost are there. So here you can just plant in a console log of your data. Voila. Voila and ooh la la. So jumping back to my server, I make it stop. I launch it again. And now this time I launch my server. Oh my god, it works. Except this is funny. Some weird stuff is happening, which is very much normal. Why? Because actually what you throw from the direction of the client to the server isn't so much a string, it's a buffer. So it takes the string, it encodes it as a buffer. But buffer is not something that humans like myself, especially ones with very poor sense of humor, pardon, can understand. So what you need to do is a couple of things. You need to transform this, well, buffer to string. It's actually an order. Well, how do you do that? How do you go about that? The easiest way, the most people would know, is this one. Now, if I went ahead and this is not magical, I should really accelerate the process of testing myself, of testing the server and the client here. But it works. Another way of doing it, actually, so I have here a number of methods. I'm just gonna cite some others. You can do this by, for example, doing, this has nothing to do with the networking library in Node.js at this point. It just is some knowledge that you might want to know about JS in general. You can do data to string. That would be a way. Sorry. Or you can do console log string data. That actually would work. And so there we are. This is a first minimalistic example of setting up a server client architecture on your Node.js. Congrats. If you did this, you know some stuff, some basic stuff about the net library. We can delve in more details, but this video is getting already far too long. So maybe some other time. Take care until then. Bye-bye.